America is facing a crisis that cannot be solved without restoring the family. Hello, I'm Apostle Tommy Quick. I am the founder and president of Christian Families Against Destructive Decisions, and I'm excited today because it's the time of year again for the CFAD Family Conference. We are making a shift and unveiling what the Lord has given us that is more than just advocacy, talking about the challenges and praise God, the crisis that the family is in, but also we're going to share God's plan for restoring the family in America. You don't want to miss it. Our theme this year is bringing it home from design to dominion. And you know, God created all things. He created the family. He had a design for it, how it should look, how it should operate, what the fruit of it should be. And we have gotten away from that. But this year, we're going back to the blueprint. We're going back to the design, and we're going to show individuals, families, how to build according to God's design and therefore flourish in life to the point of exercising dominion in the 7 important areas that every family needs to dominate. When I embraced this challenge to restore the family a number of years ago, I was told by someone that I love dearly, a wise gentleman, that I was exposing myself to rejection because the family is no longer of value in America today. But you know, I wasn't looking at myself. I wasn't looking at the impact that it would have upon me. I was responding to the God of the Bible who had called me to this mission. I found out that the mission is biblically based. It is a latter-day ministry. And you know, when I think about David, and he became king from a shepherd boy. When I think about Samuel becoming the greatest prophet and judge of his time, when I think about, praise God, Abraham becoming the father of children more numerous than the stars, and all these great men made great accomplishments. But you know what? I don't look at them. I look at the God that called and used them in such mighty ways. And in that spirit, I responded to the call of God to fight for the family. And we've been fighting boldly, and God is blessing. Our target is your home, your doorstep, your threshold, because all positive change is going to start at home around the kitchen table instead of in the halls of government. One of our guests is Delano Squires of the Heritage Foundation, who's also a member of the CFAD Board of Directors. And he has written a powerful book entitled The Great Family Collapse, America's Most Overlooked Crisis. And he will confront a truth that our nation can no longer afford to ignore the breakdown of the family. And that is not merely a problem among many problems. It is the problem that is a crisis that America is facing today. I am so grateful to have Dr. Squires to be a part of our board and to be a presenter here in the conference as well. And I want to say to you, when I embraced this challenge to restore the family a number of years ago, I was told by someone that I love dearly, a wise gentleman, that I was exposing myself to rejection. I was going to suffer a lot of rejection because the family is no longer of value in America today. But you know, I wasn't looking at myself. I wasn't looking at the impact that it would have upon me. I was responding to the God of the Bible who had called me to this mission. I found out that the mission is biblically based. It is a latter-day ministry. And you know, when I think about David, and he became king from a shepherd boy, when I think about Samuel becoming the greatest prophet and judge of his time, when I think about, praise God, Abraham becoming the father of children more numerous than the stars, and all these great men made great accomplishments. But you know what? I don't look at them. I look at the God that called and used them in such mighty ways. I don't look at the reward of Abraham, the reward of David, or the reward of Samuel. I rather look at the God that they obeyed and what he was able to accomplish through their mere lives here on earth. And in that spirit, I responded to the call of God to fight for the family. And we've been fighting boldly, and God is blessing. Now that family is your family, is my family, is every family. And I want you to listen to what this man has to say, as well as others, because we must face the crisis that America will find no solution to its problems until we as individual head of houses and families find the design of God. Welcome, Delano Squires.
Thank you, Pastor Quick, for that wonderful introduction. On July 4th of this year, Americans across the country celebrated the 250th anniversary of our founding. The events that took place as the nation reached this milestone presented an opportunity to reflect on where we've been as a country and where we're going, to think about our past and our future. The founders engaged in intense debates about the size, scope, and structure of government. They designed a constitutional republic that has stood the test of time, despite the bitter partisanship that we see on an everyday basis. But the key to America's next 250 years, however, hinges on an even more fundamental institution. The family is the foundation of civilization, and marriage, the union between one man and one woman for one lifetime, is its cornerstone. It is the training camp of self-government. The home is where fathers, mothers, and children cultivate virtue and practice cooperation, responsibility, stewardship, and self-reliance. God created the institution of marriage. So it is important to view the breakdown as a family as primarily a spiritual problem, not a political or economic one. Romans 5:12 states, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned." And the fall in Genesis 3 that led to sin entering the world was caused in part by the man and the woman disregarding God's instructions for how to care for one another and the garden. This is why I'm convinced that there is no way to empower fathers, protect children, and strengthen families without restoring marriage as the cornerstone of the home. And there's no way to successfully accomplish that goal without the church leading a revival movement. But in order to rebuild according to the architect's blueprint, we first have to take stock of how much damage has been done to the structure he designed. So consider a few things. First, married households are no longer the norm. In 1970, married couples comprised 70% of all American households. Today, it's only 47%. Second, fewer children are being born, but more are being born outside of marriage and more live with a single parent. The total fertility rate has decreased from 3.65 in 1965 to 1.62 in 2023. 40% of all children today are born to unmarried parents, compared to only 8% in 1965. And roughly 1 in 4 children in America today is raised by a single parent, which is the highest rate in the world. Third, more couples are cohabiting. The share of American adults ages 18 to 44 who have ever cohabited, 59%, is higher than the percentage who've ever married, 46%. In 2022, 1 in 5 new home purchases were unmarried couples, the highest share ever recorded. And last, marriage and family are no longer priorities. A Pew study found that 65% of respondents in 2019 said that society is just as well off if people have priorities other than marriage. So you may be thinking to yourself, why do these trends even matter? Well, I have a few answers for you. In 2024, just 5% of children in married parent families were living below the poverty line, compared to 31% of children in families headed by a single mother, and 14% of kids in families headed by a single father. Besides a greater risk of poverty, children in single mother families have poorer behavioral outcomes than those in two-parent households. Children living with their married birth parents earn better grades and are less likely to be suspended and more likely to go to college. Married men and women with children consistently report higher rates of happiness than their unmarried and childless counterparts. That's why the goal should be a unified household, not simply more resources for moms and babies or just more involved fathers outside of the home. Research shows that fathers who live apart from their children are less active than dads who live with their children. For example, one CDC study from 2013 that measured paternal involvement, which included eating, reading, playing with kids across ethnic groups, found that 82% of married fathers play with their young children every day. Only 10% of fathers who did not live with their children did the same. The study showed that maintaining strong bonds got harder as the children aged. For instance, 66% of co-residential dads with children ages 5 through 18 ate with them every day. For non-residential dads with kids the same age, the figure dropped down to 3%. The only way to restore the American family is by rebuilding according to God's design. That can only be done if we make the case to current and future generations that marriage is valuable, desirable, accessible, and indispensable for the purpose of forming a family. And doing so requires the church to take the strongest role in a nationwide family revival movement. But I think it's important to understand how we got to the place where we are. I talk about some of the causes of family breakdown in my new book, The Vanishing Black Family. But these issues help explain why families are breaking down all across the country among every ethnic group. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson launched the War on Poverty. But judging by its effects, I would argue that it's really been a war on wedlock that had the most damage that did the most damage to low-income families who look to the government for support. And when it comes to welfare, the growth of the government displaced men from their rightful role as providers in the home. Even to this day, when low-income couples marry, their welfare benefits are cut significantly. The combination of those two effects encourages low-income couples to have children outside of the bonds of marriage. The Supreme Court struck down what used to be called the man in the house rule in 1968 in the King versus Smith case. The unanimous decision rejected the idea that an unrelated male in the home, let's say a mother's boyfriend, was a substitute father. But politicians and bureaucrats have no problem playing that role. And you can see that by the rapid expansion of welfare programs since the 1960s. So for instance, in 1950, total federal expenditures on public aid programs, which is a fraction of all social welfare spending, were about $1 billion. By 1975, it ballooned to $27 billion. And by 1985, it reached $62 billion. The surge in government spending and an ever-growing number of new welfare programs did not stabilize American families. If anything, it had the complete opposite effect. What followed was a rapid decline in married two-parent homes, a steady increase in non-marital births, a rise in abortions, and the spread of long-term government dependence. But like every courtship, the government's proposal to care for mothers and their children could not lead to a permanent union without their acceptance. Many single mothers were willing to say, "I do," because the feminization of poverty made welfare a major battlefront in the women's liberation movement. For example, Johnny Tillman was a welfare rights activist who became a leader in the National Welfare Rights Organization in the 1960s and was its president when it disbanded in the 1970s. Tillman wrote an essay in Ms. Magazine that showed that a relationship with the government came with its own set of challenges. She said, and I quote, "Welfare is like a super sexist marriage. You trade in a man for the man, but you can't divorce him if he treats you bad." Now, Tillman stated 99% of welfare families at the time were headed by women. Yet, despite her reservations, she saw government aid as a way to liberate poor women. She desired more from the government, her man, even as she resented the control that he exercised over her life. Johnny Tillman fought to increase the number of black women on welfare, even as she acknowledged the ways in which the system stripped women like her of their agency and dignity. Her work gave the illusion of promoting female empowerment, but the women who accepted government aid sunk deeper into dependency, not just in their own lives, but oftentimes across generations in a single family. Now, what made these changes even worse was that they took place at a time when another movement encourage women in particular to rethink their relationship to men, marriage, children, and family. The second wave feminist movement, beginning in the 1960s, had the effect of convincing women that femininity is weak, masculinity is toxic, marriage is oppressive, the home is a prison, and children are a burden. Here is Rebecca Walker, the daughter of noted feminist icon Alice Walker, on what it is that she was raised to believe about men, marriage, and family from her mom. She said, quote, "It was drummed into me that being a mother, raising children, and running a home were a form of slavery. Having a career, traveling the world, and being independent were what really mattered, according to her." Now, the daughter rejected the views of her mother and said that having a child was the most rewarding experience of her life. But she also stated that feminism has much to answer for denigrating men and encouraging women to seek independence, whatever the cost to their families. And the effects of second wave feminism can be seen in everything from the sexual revolution to the rise in no fault divorce, as well as the spread of abortion. What used to be a policy of safe, legal, and rare has turned into abortion on demand as more and more women see children not as the natural fruit of reproduction, certainly, especially within the bounds of marriage as God designed, but as the consequence of sexual activity where they desire often to have sex like men and see a child as an unnecessary burden in the lives that they want to live. Now, these two forces, big government liberalism on one hand and second wave feminism on the other, combined to radically change how men and women thought about their roles in the home and obligations to one another and their children. They were aided across decades by allies in academia, media, and politics. And this ideological battle for the family is far from over. Here's a quick scan of headlines since the landmark Supreme Court case Obergefell versus Hodges, the 5-4 decision that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. In 2018, CNN's feature story during the Father's Day weekend was titled, quote, "He gave birth. He breastfed. Now he wants his son to see him as a man," end quote. This was a profile of a man and a woman who both identified as the opposite sex, who had a child, and now the person who birthed the child wanted the child to see her as a him. And this was what was pushed by CNN on the holiday that honors fathers. GQ ran a story in 2023 titled "The Deeply Human Love Stories of People and Their Sex Dolls." And that story points to a future where people will have to ask whether both parties in a marriage are even human. New York Magazine published a practical guide to polyamory in January 2024 that seemed to signal that progressives will eventually make marriages involving 3 or more people the next civil rights movement. The New York Times published an opinion piece earlier this year titled "The Heritage Foundation's War on Gender Equality" that criticized Heritage's family policy paper for wanting to roll back progress for women. Now, I'm one of the co-authors of the paper, and I can tell you that the paper has no such policy prescriptions. At Heritage, we don't want to roll back the rights of women. We believe that women, just like men, are made in the image of God, and that men and women are equal in dignity and worth, but different in form and function. But the people who attacked our report have a very low view of women. For instance, a popular feminist writer said our plan is a how-to guide for subjugating girls and young women, a detailed plan to push them out of college, funnel them into early marriage and motherhood, and then trap them there. Now, the person who wrote this sells merchandise online celebrating abortion. So this is the fight that we're in this culture. If you are a Christian who believes the Bible and honors God for the way that he designed marriage and family, and promotes those ideals to your children, you will be called hateful, you will be called anti-woman, you will be called anti-LGBT by people who believe that it's moral and good to convince little boys that they can become little girls and to convince young women that they are better off destroying their offspring than they are having children that might inconvenience them, from starting college or taking a new job. Those are the battle lines. That is the fight that we face. This is what we're up against. We live in a culture that is hostile to both nature and scripture. So how do we move forward? I would say that the first step is to reframe the issue of family reconstruction around the needs of children, not the desires of adults. I believe that children have a right to the affection, protection, connection, correction, and direction of the one man and one woman that created them, and that right is best exercised in a loving, low-conflict household with a married mom and dad. See, rights always come with corresponding obligations, and the right that children have to their parents is matched by the obligation that parents have to take care of their children, because creation always comes with a responsibility for stewardship. And this is why we should always look to the man and woman who create a baby to be the first ones in line to support the baby. Doesn't mean we can't help. Churches are called to help families and certainly orphans and widows. But the primary responsibility for raising children rests with their parents, particularly their fathers. And by far the most important institution needed to proclaim this message of a unified household is the church. Pastors who preach the gospel and believe their Bible are needed more than ever to boldly declare that God's desire for humanity, marriage, and family are all good. Americans need churches and pastors who are biblically grounded and culturally aware. These men will play a critical role in discipling their members and the broader culture about who created the world, why it works as it does, and how it holds together. For instance, Colossians 1:15-17 says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." Again, men and women are equal in dignity and worth, but different in form and function. Androgyny is not equality, and you can no more change a man into a woman than you can change a cubic zirconia into a diamond. Why? Because the issue that we're talking about is about composition, not cosmetics. So that's why when we think about how to revive marriage and rebuild the family, we should always think about the architect and designer of the institution. And what do we find in Genesis 2:24? We find the first marriage. That scripture reads, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Again, it's important to reiterate, especially in our culture, that marriage is between one man and one woman for one lifetime, and that those two should be committed to one another and all of the fruit that come from their union. It's important to mention that fruit because our culture is hostile to children, which is why Planned Parenthood is one of the most endorsed and influential institutions in our country. And as I said, every child has a right to the love and support from the mother and father who created them. And when it comes to children, we take our views on the value of human life and the value of the unborn from the Word. Psalm 139:13-14 says, "For you formed my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and I know this very well." These are the foundational issues that we must get right if we want to preserve a society worth passing on to future generations. Affirming the Bible is the least that pastors can do to help restore the family. If churches want to create a culture of marriage in their communities, they must be willing to turn doctrine into practice by helping men and women create and sustain loving marriages and stable families. Some pastors, for instance, may be called to extend their influence through community marriage initiatives that train leaders to help couples in every season of their relationships. Schools also have a role to play in creating a culture of marriage and strong families. One way that they can do this on the K through 12 level is to introduce the success sequence to students long before they make a decision to start a family. The success sequence refers to research that shows that millennials born between 1980 and 1984 have a less than 5% chance of being in poverty by the time they reach their mid-30s if they would just do three things: finish high school, get a job, and get married before having children. Now, these three steps are tangible, measurable, and achievable. And they're also very useful for students who have not grown up in two-parent, middle-class homes with a family history of long marriages and strong unions. The success sequence also appears to be popular among parents. One survey found that 68% of Black parents and 74% of parents without a college degree favor teaching the success sequence in public schools. Everyone from parents to principals are willing to put feelings aside to introduce students to information that can help them lead productive, fulfilling lives. There's no reason that the approach that's used when promoting college can't be used when promoting marriage. The role that schools play in creating a marriage and family culture in Black America does not stop in the 12th grade. Efforts to strengthen the family will also require HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to play a role in creating a culture of marriage. Hampton University can serve as a model for this. Hampton, since the 1980s, has had an annual conference on the Black family. It has also offered coursework on relationships, and it can serve as a model for other schools who want to incorporate marriage and family work both on an academic level and an institutional level. But family-focused HBCUs can do much more than host conferences on marriage. They should be at the forefront of attempts to produce original research that looks at the ways in which men and women today view gender roles, relationships, marriage, children, and family. In fact, I've proposed the creation of an HBCU marriage and family consortium that would do that very thing. That type of consortium would align values-aligned HBCUs to do original research on attitudes and views around marriage and family across the country. It would also provide opportunities for schools to do their own data collection, whether that is surveying students from the time they come in as freshmen to the time they leave as seniors, asking them questions like, would they be open to finding a spouse during the 4 years that they're on campus? Surveys could also look at the family formation patterns of alumni. It would be good to know whether a couple who met on an HBCU campus in the 1980s as 20-year-olds would be open to their own children getting married at the same stage in life. Schools can also cultivate a culture of marriage in their own communities by offering their facilities, so their buildings and their grounds, for couples in the community at a discounted rate if those couples choose to get married or have a reception. So, for instance, let's say a couple lives close to an HBCU, the school would offer access to the campus at a discounted rate, and all it would ask for is access to some of the photos and video for instance, because the school may want to run its own marriage and family public awareness campaign. These are ways to decrease the types of town and gown tensions that you hear people talk about between the schools and the communities in which they're located. But it will also send a signal to students that the institution stands for the institution of marriage. And another added benefit is that you could get students who are in hospitality programs to come out and provide services and assist with the wedding and or the reception. These are the types of things that schools can do on an individual and local level. And none of them alone will create a culture of marriage. But together, this would have the effect of beginning to plant seeds and water and give light to things that all of the institutions in our country should be willing to support. Because ultimately, we all have a vested interest in seeing families be as strong as possible. The other added benefit is that this type of thing could create the ring by spring culture that is associated with many Southern and conservative colleges. So, as I said, none of these ideas in isolation can rebuild the family, but taken together, they plant the seeds of marriage and family life in the minds of students. There's no reason that schools that invest millions in helping students become scholars can't set aside a much smaller amount to getting young people to think about being spouses one day. The government also has a role to play in a marriage revival. On the low end, this could be local municipal government setting aside funding to do advertising campaigns all across the county or the city. Some states may want to do this on a state level. In the Heritage Family Policy paper, we had several ideas that promoted marriage and strong families. One was called the NEST credit, which stands for Newlywed Early Starters Trust. NEST builds on the foundation and the idea of the Trump accounts, but instead of $1,000 being invested at the time a child is born, the NEST idea would invest $2,500. And the qualifying event to take a distribution on those funds would be when that young person gets married, particularly if they do it before the age of 30. So let's say two children are born next week and their parents sign them up for Nest accounts. If they get married, let's say at the age of 28, they would have access to about $35,000 right when they're beginning to start a life together. That's the type of those are the types of resources that you can use, whether to pay for a wedding or reception, to pay for a honeymoon, or more importantly, to pay for a home, and to have some cushion when you get started building a life together. Other states and municipalities can do other things to send the signal that the state is in the marriage business. So, for instance, a state or municipality or even a city government can issue proclamations and awards for couples who stay together for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, or even 70 years. They can recognize these couples and hold them up to the community and give young people an example of what is possible if they marry early, stay together, remain faithful, practice their values, and stick with the marriage until the very end. But here's another novel idea that I'd like to introduce. It's a boot camp for cohabiting couples with children. Now, this idea would require couples to share at least one biological child, so that you can ensure that the mother and the father have a vested interest in raising this child together, and give us the best chances of creating a unified household. Now, recruitment could be done through local nonprofits that work with families, as well as via radio, transit, and social media ads. Now, the federal government has already earmarked funds for these types of programs, including $35 million for one initiative called Helping Every Area of Relationships Thrive, or HEART. A local church could use this type of grant to run a program that covers uh, issues such as communication, conflict resolution, money management, blended families, sex and fidelity, um, and dealing with family and friends. Right? Successful completion of the program would mean that couples are ready to walk down the aisle at a communal wedding by the end of the boot camp. The bride and groom would also be paired with a mentor couple who can walk alongside them through the inevitable ups and downs of married life. But the most innovative aspect of the program, however, will be to add a monetary incentive for couples to get and stay married. For example, each couple that completes the program could receive a wedding bonus of $10,000 on their wedding day to be paid through a foundation or private donor, not with government funds. Obviously, there will be provisions to discourage bad actors or people who want to take advantage of the program. But the purpose of the monetary award is to give an incentive, particularly for low income working class couples who don't have a family history of marriage going back 2, 3 generations. So, as I close, I want to note that one of the origins of the word culture is the Latin word cultura, which is an agricultural term related to tilling land and the intentional preparation of the earth for fruitful activity. And what holds true in the agricultural realm also holds true in the family realm. Because when it comes to creating a culture of marriage and strong families, we need to be intentional about planting and watering those things we hope to grow and pruning and weeding anything that threatens a good harvest. Some of the most effective planters in any community are Christian couples who model healthy marriages and family life to the younger generation. We need Titus 2 wives teaching young women how to love their husbands and children, and Ephesians 5 men, husbands, teaching young men what it looks like to love their wives like Christ loved the church. Why? Well, I think the answer is simple. There's no greater example of privilege in America today than a child who grows up with his or her married biological parents in a loving, safe, and secure household. That type of household aligns everyone's interests, the interests of mom, dad, and baby, as husband, wife, and child. That's what we should be fighting for. Now, I'm under no illusion. I know that this fight will not be easy, but righting the relationship between men, women, and the God who created the institution of marriage is definitely worth it.